Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Dan Cohen. I'm a consultant from Signavio, and I'm here today to talk to you about how you can bring your process models to life with Signavio Workflow Accelerator. So just a quick agenda for what's ahead here in this presentation. We're going to see how simple workflows are built and executed in Signavio Workflow Accelerator, and I have a little demo that I'm going to walk through. And we'll talk about what types of actions Workflow Accelerator is capable of executing, right? What can it do? What can't it do? We'll talk about how a decision maker, or multiple decision makers in some cases, may enter their decisions into an in-flight workflow, thus impacting the flow of the process, right? Based on their decisions, certain actions will be carried out or excluded. And we'll also see how decisions can be automated based on predefined data or user form inputs, right? So every time a decision has to be made, we don't necessarily need to have someone manually making that decision. It can sometimes be automated, right? So we'll take a look at that as well. So on this slide, just a quick note on terminology here, right? So when I say workflow, what do I really mean by that word at all, right? And it's a word that we've used plenty throughout this webinar already. We use it on our day-to-day work. And at Signavio, when we use this word, it has a few particular connotations. And I have sort of a textbook type definition here, right? So we say a workflow is the definition, execution, and automation of business processes where tasks, information, or documents are passed from one participant to another for action according to a set of procedural rules, right? And I have this little example, which is a very basic process model down here on this slide, which shows, sales triggers an order, a supervisor approves an order, a procurement person procures parts for the order, and then an accounting person creates an invoice, right? So essentially, these are business processes where multiple participants are interacting with each other, exchanging information or documents according to a certain set of procedural rules, working towards certain end goals, right? So, of course, many business processes we encounter in typical day-to-day scenarios fall into this category of workflows, the way we would describe it here. Not necessarily all processes are a good fit for Workflow Accelerator, though certainly many processes, fall into this category. For example, if you had a process that was fully automated, right, truly 100% automated, we wouldn't call that a workflow necessarily, right? If it's truly something that people aren't doing manual steps in at all, then we wouldn't consider that a workflow. However, most workflows are certainly IT system supported, right? They at least have steps where maybe some automation is occurring, or certainly on the manual steps, people are doing it with the help of business software, certainly. Similarly, if you had a process that was just one person sitting by themselves in their office, going through certain steps, wouldn't necessarily consider that a workflow either, right? Workflows, again, it's about having multiple personas who are interacting with each other, exchanging documents and information, according to sets of procedural rules, working towards some goals. And again, they're usually doing this with the support of IT systems, right? And examples of this might be things like approval of quotations, right, for sales, tech support service requests, employee or customer onboarding, procurement of office supplies, right? Even something as simple as just a request to purchase something in the office. And I'll actually be taking a look at a simple example that covers that process. And also things like handling of travel expenses, right? Essentially any situation where maybe some person needs to approve certain things, right? Take a look at some information and either approve or reject it based on their expertise. And these processes can span from very simple, small, compact processes to extremely complex, right? So we have one customer at Signavio who's a large insurance company, and they actually recently implemented workflow for their rate change process, right? So, in the insurance world, when there are times when the rate of a certain product, the price of one of their insurance products has to change. And when that happens, it kicks off a set of actions which can be very complex, right? Depending on what state the product is for, right? Depending on what type of insurance we're talking about, right? Is it auto insurance? Is it home insurance? Is it on the West Coast? Is it in New York, right? Where is it? What is it? And what's the change? Depending on that, that's going to impact who's responsible and what they have to do. So, in the past, before workflow was involved, this was orchestrating a process like that was a mess, right? It was essentially a lot of people exchanging emails with each other, referencing out-of-date spreadsheets that they had stored on their computers, and essentially crossing their fingers and hoping that everyone else was doing their part of the process right. And and also there was no central audit history, right? There was no clear log of what happened when, of who did what, and it was essentially a mess. Once they brought Workflow Accelerator in to implement this process, things began to run a lot smoother. So again, we'll be taking a look at a very simple process, just to give you an idea of what workflow can do, though certainly the processes that workflow is capable of handling can be extremely complex. It certainly scales very well with highly complex processes. So now that we understand what a workflow is, right, how does Signavio exactly fit into this, right? So Signavio Workflow Accelerator's contribution here is really twofold, I would say. So first of all, with regards to the manual steps in a process where a human actually has to fill out a form or make a decision on something, with regards to those manual steps, Signavio essentially acts as what we would call an orchestration layer. All right, it orchestrates things by notifying people when it's their turn to do something, providing them with a easy to understand to-do list in a user-friendly inbox type interface. They just get their to-do list. They get notification when it's their turn to do something, and also very user-friendly forms, right? So they're provided with forms where they can input certain information, input their decisions, and they can also read information off other forms other people have filled out, right? So by doing this sort of orchestration, Signavio Workflow Accelerator is always keeping track of whose turn it is to do what in the process. When it's someone's turn to carry out a task, Signavio notifies them of that, provides them with all the information they need to do their task, and then a nice form they can fill out and say they're done, right? So on the manual side of things, Workflow Accelerator is a orchestration layer of sorts. And with regards to the simple repetitive work, certain things can just be automated, right? There's plenty of simple repetitive type tasks that can be automated. Generating documents from standard templates, blasting out emails according to certain templates, and performing certain repetitive operations and extractions of information from files or external systems. These types of very basic repetitive mechanical tasks can also be automated within Signavio, right? So there is certainly an aspect of automation, as well as an aspect of orchestration behind what Workflow Accelerator does. And the great thing about it is it's all cloud-based, of course, so everyone is accessing all of their tasks and all of these workflows through a central web-based repository in their browser, right? People just sign in, and you sign into design your workflows, right, to define the tasks to be done, and then the people doing the tasks, they sign in right to the same place and do their tasks. So everything is very centralized. It's a very user-friendly, accessible, web-based interface that really enhances organizations' ability to collaborate on these types of things. So I have a bit of a live demo here. I'm going to show a little bit of Workflow Accelerator in action. I'm going to get away from the PowerPoint slides here and get into some actual content. So I have prepared for you here. I've signed into Signavio Workflow Accelerator. I'm under my processes tab here, and I see my list of processes, and there's only one that I have here in this workspace. I have this webinar demo, purchase approval. So this process is a process where a person wants to have a purchase made for the office. They submit a request to have the purchase made. It goes through various rounds of approval based on the information they submitted. And then ultimately a decision is made to either approve or reject, right? And in the end, the person submitting this gets an email in their inbox eventually saying your purchase was approved or your purchase was rejected. So I can start a new case of this process, right? So in Workflow, there's the start new case button. I can go ahead and just start a new request. Before I do that, I'm going to click here on the name of the workflow to take a look at the configuration options, right? To take a look at how this is actually set up here in Signavio. So if I click here, it takes me to this page, and the first place that it takes you is this tab, trigger. So every workflow, of course, needs a trigger, right? A process needs to somehow know that it's time to start, right? And processes in Signavio Workflow Accelerator can be triggered in a number of different ways. You can have your process get triggered when an email is sent. You can have your process get triggered when something happens in an external system, like Salesforce, for example. The most common trigger that you'll see probably is simple form triggers, right? When someone wants to start a new case of the process, there's a form for them to fill out. So in this case, this form is defined here from various different types of fields, which I've defined here in this workflow. So the fields that the person has to enter to make the request, the amount of the purchase in US dollars, a link to the item. They have to put who their supervisor is. And this is actually, it's what's called a user field in Signavio. And a user field is going to provide the person filling this form out with a drop-down list of all the people in Signavio who are candidates to do tasks, right? So they're not just going to be typing in their supervisor's name. There's going to be a pre-existing list built into Signavio with all the Signavio users, and they'll pick that person's name off that list. They can also enter their department. What department is this for? This is a multiple choice field that I've defined here. And I just made the, for simplicity, I just put 3 options of sales, consulting, marketing. Of course, there could be many more. I have a field for the address for shipment. If your product, if your request for purchase is actually approved in the end, the purchaser will need the address to ship it to. So you'll need to enter that in. And then also I've optionally included a field here for the description. So in this workflow, if a person wants to request to have a purchase made, they come into Signavio, they fill out a form which looks much like this. Once they filled it out, they click a button that says request purchase approval. And at that point, the workflow has been triggered, right? And once your workflow has been triggered, it's time to carry out the actions, right? To do the actual steps of the workflow. So those actions are defined up here in this actions tab. If I click on this actions tab, it's going to show me all the steps that are going to happen after this trigger form is submitted. And it's going to show that to me in the form of a BPMN diagram, right? So this is BPMN, business process modeling notation. And even if you're not super familiar with BPMN, you can probably look at this and get somewhat of an idea of what's going on. We read this from left to right, right? So you have, your start event here. This represents the start, and you move from left to right, essentially. You can see the first thing that happens is there's a step of supervisor approval. They either approve or reject. If they reject, then a rejection email is sent, right? And then if they approve, a bunch of other stuff happens, right? So these boxes here represent tasks, essentially, steps where someone needs to do something. These splits, these branches in the process, or what we call gateways, these are points where essentially, a decision has to be made one way or the other, right? And the configuration of each of these elements, we can see if we click on them, right? So if I click on this step here, supervisor approval, I can see that here the supervisor is going to be provided with a form as well, right? So just like the person filling out the trigger form, they had a form where they had to fill out certain fields. This person now is going to get a form which is read only. So it's giving them a read only view of what was submitted in the trigger form in this case. So in this case, because the supervisor doesn't need to enter anything necessarily, they just read the information and then click either approve or reject at the end. So they'll see the amount in US dollars, the link to item, the description. Notice they don't see all the form information, right? Because it's not all necessarily relevant to them, right? They don't need to know the address or anything like that, right? So they only see what's relevant to them. In this case, it's read only. There's no field for them to fill out a comment or anything like that. Though you could certainly include that, right? You could include a mix of read only and editable fields in a form, right? In this case, the supervisor sees a read only field, and where they see the amount, they see the link to the item, they see the description, and then they either choose to approve or reject the purchase. So now who gets this task? Well, if I click on this general tab here, it shows that it's going to my supervisor, which was a field defined in the trigger form, right? So you'll recall in the trigger form, the person selected who their supervisor was, and that's going to be the person this task gets routed to, right? It's going to be just based on whoever was entered in the trigger form, right? So that's a very simple way of assigning responsibility in a workflow. Of course, there's certainly much more complex possibilities in terms of how you assign responsibilities, right? In this case, the supervisor was just entered in the trigger form. However, you might have a situation where a workflow determines who the appropriate supervisor is based on who's submitting it, or based on what time of year it is, or even based on what type of purchase it is, right? Things like that. And we will see later in this process that roles can be assigned differently. But this is a very simple example of how a role may be assigned. The supervisor who was entered in the trigger form is going to be routed this task where they see this form and they either approve or reject the purchase. Now, if they approve or reject, right? So there's two different paths that we can go here. And the decision point is configured on this gateway. And if I click on this gateway where the process splits, you can see that this here is a manual decision, right? Manual decision means that the person in the step before, the supervisor, is manually making the choice by clicking a button of either approve or reject, right? So this is a manual decision with two possibilities, right? Approve and reject. So the person who's the supervisor will see a button that says approve and a button that says reject. If they click reject, then it goes to this task where we send a rejection email, right? So this is an example of how Signavio email tasks can send template emails to one or more people. So in this case, it's going to the case creator, right? We could also send it to one or many predefined emails, right? We could build in logic to dynamically determine who it's being sent to. But in this case, it's just being sent to the case creator, plain and simple. And they're going to see an email that says your purchase request has been rejected. It shows some of the information, right? So the amount, the link, and the description. And then that's that, right? So in this case, if the supervisor rejects, then the email is sent out and the process comes to a close. However, if they approve, then we can move on to this next phase of the approval process here. So now the next decision that's being made here is an automatic one, right? So this next split in the process is an automatic decision. So unlike the previous one, which was a manual one, where the supervisor had to click a button for either approve or reject, this is an automatic decision where we're just asking, is the purchase for over $1,000, right? And we already know that based off of the information that was submitted in the trigger form. So this automatic decision is asking, if the amount in US dollars is greater than or equal to 1,000, then we have to go to this step down here, right? We have to go to the next phase of the decision making. And if the amount is for less than $1,000, we just skip over this phase and go straight to place the purchase, essentially. So again, if the item is less than $1,000, then we just proceed straight to place the purchase. If the item is more than $1,000, we need to go through one more phase of approval here. So the next phase of approval is going to be dependent on which department we're in, right? And this is, again, a case of sort of more dynamically assigning roles and responsibilities. In this case, we're asking, which department is it, right? We entered in the department in the trigger form. So if you entered in consulting as the department, you're going to go to the step consulting managerial approval. If you entered sales for the department, then you're going to go to the step of sales managerial approval. And if you entered marketing as your department, you'll go to this step of marketing managerial approval. Now, each of these steps has essentially the same form that the supervisor saw, right? It's just a form with the amount, the link, and the description, and they click approve or reject. But the difference is who is going to be assigned, right? So the consulting managers are different people from the sales managers, are different people from the marketing managers, of course. And we can see in here in this general tab here, I've defined these people. I just made sort of some dummy email addresses here, Bill Davis and Fred Johnson, not real people, but I made these dummy email addresses to represent, these would be the consulting managers in this case, right? And in this case, these people, their names are just hard coded into the task, right? It's just a predefined list that's written here. Doing it this way, if say Bill left the company, I'd have to go in here and update this, of course. Having said that, there are more dynamic technical ways that you can fetch the person who's responsible, right? So if you want to, build some sort of integration where you're referencing information in the Signavio dictionary to read who's the consulting supervisor today, those types of more advanced scenarios can be built, right? Though for the sake of time today, I just wanted to show something simple, right? The consulting managers are both going to get this task, and this is a multi-user task here. So here we have a task that actually multiple people have to give input, and this is configured so that both people have to choose approve, right? So if even one person says reject in this case, then we send a rejection email. If both approve, then we can proceed to the next step, which is going to be to place the purchase. So placing the purchase, in this step, we see some different information in the form for this one, right? So this one is going to be routed to a person in purchasing. And again, I have a dummy email address for this, Pam Richards. This person in purchasing would get routed this form where they would see the link, the amount, the address for shipping, because they actually need to have the goods sent. And then there's a mandatory field here where they would need to upload a receipt, right? So the idea here is this person would get this task in their inbox. They'd see, you're supposed to order this item. They would go purchase the item with their corporate card outside of Signavio, of course, right? Some of this work, of course, does need to be done outside of Signavio, right? Signavio acts as the orchestrator, but certain tasks, of course, must be done outside of Signavio. So they would go outside of Signavio, place the purchase with their corporate card, upload the receipt, and then at the bottom there would just be a button that says done, right? There's no like approve or reject option for them. There's no split in the process after this point. It's just a plain and simple, done. Once you click that, an approval email is sent out, just like the the rejection email, except this one is bringing good news, and it also has the receipt attached. And then the process comes to a close. So this is how the process works, and this is how it was configured. And so now I'll walk through real quick, starting a new case of this process. So if I want to start a new case of this process, I'm greeted with this trigger form, right? So I need to enter in some information. So in this case, I have a big screen TV here that I want to buy for the conference room, right? So I got the link for it. So I'll go in here and say, it's $1,500. Here's the link to the item. My supervisor, I have to select from this drop-down list of people in Signavio. And I have this, again, the dummy email address, Joe Smith, is just this person who I've made here. I'll say my department is consulting. I will put this address here real quick, just a dummy address, and I'll put a little text description, TV for conference room. And I'll hit request purchase approval. So now in a real workflow here, my job as the requester would be done, right? At this point, my role as requester, I would simply sit back and wait for my inbox to either get an email saying approved or rejected, and that's that. Now I can see, it brings me to this cases tab, which shows me the progress of the process. And I can see that right now it's on this step, supervisor approval, which is handled by Joe Smith. So I can click on this and it shows me what Joe sees, right? So Joe sees a task in his task inbox showing him this form with a button approve or reject. This is for Joe, so I can't click these buttons. However, as a Signavio consultant, I'm a super user admin in this workspace with full permissions. So with those permissions, I can actually snag tasks for myself, right? Of course, most Signavio users would not have that level of permissions, but just for the sake of time here, so I don't have to log in and log out a bunch of times, I'll click assign to myself, and now I can click approve here. So now, since the purchase was for over $1,000, it gets routed to managerial approval, consulting managerial approval. And I can see here that 2 tasks now have popped up, one for Bill and one for Fred, my 2, hypothetical consulting managers here. Again, I'm going to take this task for myself. So I'll say approve. Both Bill and Fred have to be in agreement on this one, right? So both of us have to click approve on this one. So then finally, we get to this step of place purchase, right? Which again is Pam Richards. I will snag this task for myself. At this point, I would have to fill out, a receipt, right? So I see the link, I see the amount in US dollars, the shipping address. I would go outside of Signavio, make the purchase with my corporate card, come back and upload my receipt over here. Once I've done that, I click done. And now the process has come to a close, right? And if I go to this cases tab here, actually, I can see, this request has closed, it's done. And actually in my inbox, I now have my approval email just came in, right? So this approval email just came in, your purchase has been approved, link to the item and receipt attached. All right, so I know I'm running low on time here, so that's pretty much all I had to show for my live demo. Just a few things I want to touch on real quick of additional features we haven't seen yet. Signavio also includes reminders and escalations, so you can have it so that certain tasks have a due date. People get reminded if they're getting close to that due date, and then if the due date is passed, you can have that situation escalated. We have JavaScript tasks, so you can actually build tasks into your workflows that execute JavaScript code for doing more complex calculations, parsing out files, or populating information in files, or even exchanging HTTP requests with external systems, right? So you can push some information up to the cloud or sync your dictionary up with some other tool, things like that. Integration with the dictionary, right? And this is tied into the JavaScript tasks, but the dictionary in Signavio is basically a database of reusable components. That's typically IT systems, org units, data objects, things like that you may want to reference throughout your process models. You can actually update that database using workflow. Your workflows can read to or write to or read from that data. And also, sync it up with external systems, as I mentioned. We have document template tasks, which are essentially tasks where without any code, you can fill out template paperwork, right? You can actually have workflows fill out paperwork for you with the provided information, take fields and pop it into a template Word document or PDF or something like that. And also decision modeling notation, DMN, is supported in workflow as well. So that's just sort of a decision-based alternative to BPMN, which can allow you to condense very complex decisions that would be unwieldy in BPMN. They can be quite compact and simple in DMN. It's kind of just a matter of preference, right? Certain highly decision-oriented processes are good candidates for this. Others are better suited for BPMN. But if you do have anyone at your company who's interested in DMN, you can know that it is something that Signavio supports as well. So that's about it. I'd be glad to answer any questions if you've got them.